It was a warm afternoon in Savannah, Georgia. The sun peeked through fluffy clouds, casting a golden glow on the streets. In the heart of the town, a small neighborhood grocery store buzzed with activity. Shoppers maneuvered their carts through the narrow aisles, focused on their shopping lists. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, pointing at vibrant candy displays. It was an ordinary day, or so it appeared. Among the shoppers was Denzel Washington, the famous actor. However, today, he wasn't a star. He was simply a man picking up a few items, dressed in a plain gray hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. He moved quietly, carrying a handbasket filled with bananas, bread, and a carton of milk. His calm demeanor blended into the rhythm of the store. Denzel approached the produce section, his basket balanced neatly on one arm while his other hand reached for a fresh apple. That's when he noticed her, an elderly woman standing a few feet away. She resembled someone's sweet grandmother, dressed in a pale pink sweater and neatly pressed slacks. Her white hair was styled perfectly, and her glasses rested on her nose, but her face held an expression that was anything but kind. Her name was Mrs. Whitaker. In her late 70s, she had spent her entire life in Savannah. She was known in her neighborhood for her sharp tongue and unwavering opinions. Today, she was muttering under her breath, her thin lips pressed tightly together as she reached for a bag of oranges. Her gaze fell on Denzel, and something shifted in her eyes. She stood up straighter, gripping her shopping cart with both hands. "People like you don't belong here," she said, her voice loud enough for others nearby to hear. Denzel froze. He wasn't sure if she was addressing him. Slowly, he looked up from the apples in his hand, his dark eyes meeting hers. She didn't stop there. "You should go back to Africa," she said sharply, her tone cutting through the hum of the store. The room seemed to halt. The cheerful chatter faded. Shoppers paused mid-step. A young man stocking lettuce stood frozen, a head of Roma cradled in his hands. A mother pushing a stroller turned her head sharply, her mouth falling open. The hum of the store was replaced by a thick, uneasy silence. Denzel's hand lowered slowly, placing the apple back on the stand. His face was calm, but his eyes revealed a flicker of surprise. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. For a moment, he glanced around the room. The other shoppers were watching, their expressions a mix of discomfort and anticipation. It felt as if the air itself had grown heavier. Mrs. Whitaker didn't look away. Her stance was firm, her chin raised defiantly. Her fingers tightened around her cart handle as though she expected him to react angrily. But Denzel didn't shout. He didn't rush to respond. Instead, he stood tall and let the silence linger, giving weight to her words. The pause felt longer than it was. It stretched heavy with tension as every eye in the room remained fixed on him. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low and calm, yet it carried clearly across the room. "Ma'am," he said, tilting his head slightly, "do you know what you just said?" Mrs. Whitaker's expression didn't waver. "I said what I meant," she replied, her voice sharper this time. "This is my country. You don't belong here." A murmur rippled through the crowd. A man standing near the bread aisle coughed awkwardly and shifted his weight from one foot to the other. A teenage girl clutching a box of cereal whispered something to her friend. But no one moved closer. No one dared intervene. Denzel didn't flinch. He held her gaze, his own face unreadable. For a moment, he simply studied her, as though weighing his next words carefully. "You believe that?" he asked, his tone soft but firm. Mrs. Whitaker crossed her arms over her chest, her expression resolute. "I do," she said. The silence that followed was thick. Denzel's hand moved to adjust the basket he carried, shifting its weight to his other arm. The quiet around them felt like a storm waiting to break, and the tension pulled everyone in closer. Denzel took another slow breath. Then he nodded, a gesture that seemed to surprise Mrs. Whitaker. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Let's talk about it." The room held its breath. Shoppers who had been pretending not to notice were now openly watching. The young cashier at the front of the store leaned slightly over her counter, craning her neck to see what would happen next. A man near the dairy aisle stood frozen, a carton of eggs in his hand. Mrs. Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "There's nothing to talk about," she snapped. But Denzel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let her words settle, giving her a chance to reflect on them. The air in the store was thick with expectation. The moment felt bigger than the two of them, as though everyone knew they were witnessing something significant. Finally, Denzel set his basket down gently on the floor. His calm demeanor didn't waver. He straightened his posture, his presence somehow growing larger. "You think I don't belong here?" he said, his voice as steady as ever. "But let me tell you something about where I come from." Every pair of eyes in the store stayed fixed on him. Even the humming refrigerators in the background seemed to grow quieter. Mrs. Whitaker blinked, her expression faltering just slightly. Denzel didn't rush his words. He spoke with deliberate care, each one carrying the weight of history and experience. "My great-grandparents worked this land," he said, "not by choice, but by force. They were brought here in chains, made to work under the harshest conditions, all so this country could be built." Mrs. Whitaker's face tightened, but she didn't respond. Denzel continued, his voice unwavering. "My father," he said, "fought for this country. He wore a uniform, risked his life, and came home to a place that still didn't treat him like an equal. He didn't complain. He didn't turn his back on this country. Instead, he taught me to believe in its promise, the promise that we're all created equal." The tension in the store shifted. The initial discomfort was replaced by something deeper, a collective sense of reflection. A young mother holding a basket of groceries nodded slowly. An older man standing near the deli counter whispered, "That's the truth." Denzel's voice softened, though it lost none of its power. "So when you tell me I don't belong here," he said, "what you're really saying is that my contributions, my family sacrifices don't matter. But I'll tell you this, ma'am, I belong here just as much as you do, maybe even more." Whitaker's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, the firmness in her stance seemed to falter. She looked around, her eyes meeting those of the other shoppers, but no one spoke in her defense. The silence stretched again, but this time, it felt different, in luck. It wasn't filled with tension. It was filled with possibility. Mrs. Whitaker's hands trembled slightly as they gripped her cart. Her face, which had been stern and unyielding, softened just enough to reveal uncertainty. The eyes of the other shoppers remained fixed on her, but not with judgment, rather with expectation, as if they too were waiting for something to change. Denzel stood calmly, his gaze steady but not unkind. The silence between them grew warmer, less like the charged stillness of a confrontation, and more like the quiet of a moment that demanded reflection. Finally, Denzel broke the silence. His voice was even, almost gentle. "You don't have to answer me, Mrs. Whitaker," she said quickly, almost automatically. Her tone lacked the sharpness it had carried moments before. "Mrs. Whitaker," Denzel repeated with a respectful nod. "You don't have to answer me, but I'd like you to think about something. What does it mean to belong? Is it about where we were born, the color of our skin, or is it about the kind of life we lead, the values we live by, and the legacy we leave behind?" Whitaker swallowed hard, her lips pressed together, but her shoulders had relaxed ever so slightly. She looked down at the apples in her cart, avoiding his gaze. But Fick. The crowd now seemed almost reverent. A teenage boy near the frozen foods whispered to his mother, "He's so calm." She nodded, but didn't take her eyes off the scene. "I'm not here to argue with you," Denzel continued, his words slow and deliberate, as if he wanted to ensure they reached her heart. "I'm not here to change your mind. That's something only you can do. But I do want to leave you with this. Belonging isn't about dividing people. It's about connecting with each other. It's about finding common ground and building from there." A woman near the bread aisle, cradling a loaf in her arms, murmured, "That's true." Mrs. Whitaker's head tilted slightly, as if she were listening. Even though she didn't respond, her grip on her cart loosened, and for a moment she looked older, not just in years but in the weight she seemed to carry. Denzel's voice softened even more. "Whitaker, I know change isn't easy. I know it's hard to look at the world differently than you've been taught. But it's worth it for all of us." The room felt charged with an unspoken energy, as if something monumental were taking place, even though no one moved. A young man in his early 20s, standing near the dairy section, cleared his throat. His name was Aaron, a store employee who had been quietly shelving yogurt when the confrontation began. Now he took a tentative step forward. "He's right," Aaron said, his voice steady but nervous. "I grew up here in Savannah. My mom works 3 jobs. My dad served in the army. We've worked hard just like everyone else, and I've always felt like this was my home. Because it is. No one should be told they don't belong here." His words added to the growing sense in the room. A middle-aged woman, Miss Jenkins, who was standing by the cereal aisle, nodded. "My father always said the same thing," she said. "It doesn't matter what you look like or where your ancestors came from. What matters is how you live your life." Mrs. Whitaker's eyes darted around the room. The crowd wasn't judging her, but their shared agreement was undeniable. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then closed it again, uncertain. Denzel didn't push. He took a step back, letting the moment belong to her. He knew when to speak and when to let silence do the work. It was a reminder that change often starts with a single moment of courage and connection. Speaking of moments that change everything, did you know that Tom Cruise's wife made the shocking decision to divorce him right after a jaw-dropping incident? What really happened behind closed doors might surprise you, and the truth has Hollywood buzzing to this day. Don't miss the story that everyone is talking about. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now to uncover the truth behind their sudden split and the incident that changed their lives forever. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. If you liked this video, leave a like, subscribe, and help us bring you more exciting stories involving celebrities. Here, you will be updated every day on the world of celebrities. See you soon. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now to uncover the truth behind their sudden split and the incident that changed their lives forever. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. If you liked this video, leave a like, subscribe, and help us bring you more exciting stories involving celebrities. Here, you will be updated every day on the world of celebrities. See you soon.